Hi again, everyone. It's MrMostDaysOff.
And I'm the WizKid.
And we're here today to talk about our sponsor, PopThreads.com, your online destination for all pop culture t-shirts. And right now, for our listeners, you can save 15% when you use the discount code Simpsons at checkout.
Woohoo!
And they don't just have Simpsons shirts, they also have things like old school Nickelodeon, and they've even got us wrestling fans covered.
They also have tons of TV shows like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, and even movie shirts like Star Wars and Die Hard.
So make sure you head over to PopThreads.com right now.
And use the discount code Simpsons at checkout so you can save a lot of dope!
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes who grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and back with me again, your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How are you today, Rich?
I'm Oakley Dokley Doo today. This is going to be a lot of quotes in these episodes today. We're starting to get into the point where it's hard to keep up with The Simpsons a lot. But we're going to get into that. As always, I'll throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the 40 miles of open sewers. It is Miles.
Sometimes that's not too far from the truth. I had a rough day stomach-wise, y'all. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. Something did not settle correctly.
That wasn't the only thing you were throwing out today.
Well, let me also just say that this is a rough episode for old Mr. Most Days Off. You guys, anyone who listens to this show knows that as I get older, my soft spot for dogs is just getting softer and softer, and I have a hell of a fucking time when I see those puppy dog eyes looking up at Homer and the rest of the family. I mean, that hurts, man. Like, this episode kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I think it's really funny. I think there's some great moments, and I love the heart and connection that you get, because there's some honesty in this episode that I think a lot of pet owners may not want to admit to, but you totally get pissed off at your dogs and kind of ignore them at times, and you feel terrible, and it's a cycle. But I love my dogs, and this one is just rough, but it's still a good episode.
So another case of those moments where, like, as a kid, you see Santa's little helper, like, keeling over and falling on the floor, and you're like, he's dying, and they don't care. But now that you're older and you're rewatching, you're like, oh my god, this is terrible.
Yeah, spot on, man. As a kid, I was a heartless fuck, but now I can't do it, man. It's John Wick all over again.
I knew you were gonna say that.
But this episode is called Dog of Death, which is already a dark title. It debuted on March 12th of 1992. Love the chalk gag on this one. I saw nothing unusual in the teacher's lounge. You know that's not the truth. And the couch gag here is pretty good too. Homer kind of sprawls out and lays down, taking up the whole couch, much like both my wife and my dogs do on a regular basis. Only they get really mad if I try to do what the rest of the family did, which is jump on their lap and crush them.
You know, I can see all that playing out in my head, too. Like, with you and Emily, I can totally see that.
Well, we already talked about this. I guess we accidentally foreshadowed, or maybe, I guess, Simpsons foreshadowed themselves, because we talked about the lottery being kind of a tax on stupid people a few episodes ago. And sure enough, they talk about it right here. It is the exploiter of the poor and the innocent. I love that Mo does that as he's turning on and polishing his beer is the answer sign.
I like the actual state lottery commercial, the state lottery, where everybody wins. Actual odds of winning are 1 in 380 million.
That's so good. And again, though, it's very, very accurate. That is the case. I love that 130 million, the jackpot, is essentially the equivalent of like what happened in Texas, or I'm sorry, this is a nationwide thing. It was the U.S. Powerball. It got to $1.5 billion, Richie.
We were playing.
You know, because we bought tickets. But at that rate, it was literally like every gas station I went to was like the Quickie Mart here in The Simpsons, where it's just packed to the brim with people buying insane amount of lottery tickets. And honestly, at 1.5 billion, I even saw, for anybody who watches Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful even bought tickets for that one. And I mean, that dude doesn't give money to anything that doesn't make money. So, you know.
Everyone was feeding the beast.
Homer is one of those people at the Quickie Mart, and he has a moment where he has to call the house to get some lucky numbers. And he's asking Bart how old he is, when's his birthday. Then he's like, when's your sister's birthday? And he gets really mad. And he's like, what type of brother are you?
You
don't even know your sister's
what type
birthday.
of brother are you? It's just so funny.
Oh, man.
He doesn't remember himself.
Well, we get our first glimpse of what this episode is really about, because while the Simpsons are all caught up in lottery fever, Santa's little helper is seeing better days. He is not looking too good, and something's clearly off with this dog. While that's going on, Kent Brockman's talking about the rush to the local library where all of the copies of the book The Lottery had been checked out. And sure enough, even Homer has one in his reading. And I love that Kent Brockman delivers the bad news that the lottery is not actually there for tips on how to win the lottery, but is actually a dark American tale.
Apparently it's actually about a public stoning.
Yeah, oh, have you never read The Lottery?
No.
Oh, dude, The Lottery is dope as fuck. Spoiler alert right now coming up, because I thought most people had. That's an assumption.
Like it was a mandatory reading in school?
Totally, but it was one of those mandatory readings that you absolutely love. Very similar to, like, The Most Dangerous Game, where the dude hunts the human. That was a mandatory reading that was, like, obviously dope.
Not for me.
Man, right on, public school. Woo-hoo!
We had to read, like, Tale of Two Cities, which I actually really liked, and Les Mis and other things like that.
Interesting. The other one that we had that I really love to this day, I think it's a great book, is To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was one that I really enjoyed. But
we did read
The
that
Lottery is actually a short story, and it's essentially, again, spoiler alert, it's coming right now. It's a group of people that are all participating in the lottery, and there's a bunch of buzz and excitement, and it's kind of from I think it's from like one villager's perspective, or some of the villagers' perspective. It's been a long time. Essentially what happens is it's kind of like an M. Night Shyamalan twist type of thing, where you find out that the person who quote-unquote wins the lottery isn't really the winner, but it's the sacrifice that the village makes each year by public stoning. And I don't remember if the sacrifice was for religious purposes, or for population control, or for whatever it was.
Doesn't really matter.
Long story short, you draw the black rock, they are throwing rocks at your ass.
What a twist.
Exactly. Pretty much everyone's got this lottery buzz one way or the other. Principal Skinner is particularly invested because the school, it turns out, gets half of the money from the lotto, is what they're being told. So that's going to buy a lot of things. One of my favorites that Skinner kind of fantasizes about is a top-of-the-line detention hall where students are held in place magnetically.
Again with the magnets.
Once again, though, back at the Simpsons household, we have the Simpsons just on the edge of their seats waiting for the lottery. Homer actually kind of asks them what they're all going to do if they win the money, and Bart's like, I'm going to put it in the bank. Lisa's like, I'm going to help the poor. Homer mocks his children for not knowing how to spend $1 million, or 140, whatever it was, and he has one of the most iconic dream sequences of The Simpsons, something that you see a lot of times online in memes and pictures and GIFs, whatever you call them. It's king-size Homer, and he's made of gold, and he's covered in jewels, and he's fucking awesome.
I just love Lenny in the image, or in the Homer's brain. Lenny's screaming, "And you're covered in gold!" And the big Homer says, 14 karat gold. Which, if you're a millionaire, why wouldn't it be 24 karat gold?
Because then he'd be SAWFT, soft.
The 14 karat gold, come on.
Well, even Mr. Burns says, all hail King Homer. Great sequence. But while this is going on, once again, breaking my little heart here is Santa's little helper lying in misery, and Maggie is actually poking him in the eye repeatedly, which I like to think, just because I'm a dog lover, that is her somehow casting a spell to help him, but it did not look comfortable from his perspective.
Well, that was her using her Jedi powers to infuse force into the dog. She was testing how much force.
Did she have to go through the eyeball, though? I mean, honestly.
Most direct route.
Fair enough.
So, it's safe to assume that Homer is definitely one of those people that's broke within 10 years if he wins the lottery.
Homer's broke within 6 months if he wins the lottery, dude. Like, that guy's, yeah. I want to know, I get the covered in gold, I get the jewels. How in the fuck is he planning on making himself king size? Is this like a precursor to, the one where he eats a bunch and has to wear a muumuu?
You know there's an actual episode in the And the seasons we're in now, where he wins the lottery and he hides the money in the tree in the backyard.
I did not know that. Cool.
Yeah, he actually spends the money on his family, buying them like nice little gifts and like hiding the gifts in places so that they don't know like where it's coming from. They think they're just happening upon these things.
Interesting.
And I think he goes broke pretty quick, or almost broke, because but at least he's spending it on his family.
That's kind of sweet and very Homer-like.
We'll get there in 20 years.
Yeah, we're on our way. Well, and for now, it's time for the lottery drawing. It's the big moment. It is time to see which Springfieldian, which I guess it could be anyone in the state, but it seems like someone in Springfield's going to win, right?
What kind of story would it be if it like had nothing to do with anybody in the town?
I guess the only other way they could go is if somebody in Shelbyville won and they like try to buy Springfield or something. That'd be interesting. But regardless, everything's shut down. Even the police station, they get a call and they're like, "Sorry, you've got the wrong number. This is 912."
But I love the way Wickham did it. This is 912.
Krusty and Mel, they think this might be their ticket out of there. We've got Homer and the rest of the Simpsons, which Marge tries to keep a level head and reminds Homer that it's a 1 in 380 million chance, and Homer's like, "Wrong again, Marge. It's 50 in 380 million."
Because Homer bought 50 tickets.
Right.
But this is like what caused the Challenger to blow up. If you actually do the statistics behind it, you don't have 50 chances in 180 or 380 million. If one ticket wins, it changes the stats on it, and you can't do that kind of math. Just because you buy 50 tickets doesn't mean you have 50
times
chances
more
out of 3. Yeah.
Yeah, that to some degree makes sense. It's probably pretty goddamn close to 50, but I bet it's off by a fraction. Real odd segue since you bring up the Challenger. The new Netflix, or by the time you hear this, the couple-week-old Netflix special with Dave Chappelle. He actually talks about that very briefly, which makes me, man, really solid work on Dave Chappelle. I've said a couple times now, I don't know that it's like the funniest stand-up I've ever seen, but that first hour is probably the best constructed comedy set I've seen in a long time. I mean, some of the callbacks and everything, it really, really connected with me. I thought he did a great job.
It wasn't necessarily, like you said, it wasn't the funniest, but it felt very real.
I also just finished watching both The People versus O.J. Simpson and the documentary, I think it was called O.J. An American Story. It was that 5-part ESPN documentary.
That won an Emmy, by the way.
It was an Oscar. What's funny about that is I actually started watching that movie, that documentary, on Oscar night with absolutely no idea that it was even up for an Oscar, because I don't really follow that, frankly. But while I'm watching this movie, my Twitter starts going crazy for this movie winning. And by the way, that's at MrMostDaysOff if you want to follow me. I was watching this movie with no knowledge that it was even running for an Oscar, and I got notification about an hour into it that it just won Best Documentary, and I looked over at the wife and was like, great choice.
So back to the lottery.
But yeah, we were talking about the lottery, and specifically the one that happens on that show we like, The Simpsons. We get the winning lottery numbers, and Kent Brockman is announcing them. We start with a great number 17, then 3, 26, 41, 38, 49. Kent Brockman realizes that he won the lottery that he just announced. He then very quickly talks about a tragic accident that happened in Cleveland and was like, goodbye, and got the fuck out of there because he had money to spend. But the Simpsons were very upset. Homer was specifically mad at Bart. He said, boy, if you were 17, we'd be rich right now.
But no, you had to be 10.
Exactly.
Which I would have put 17 on my sheet, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, then Marge says, the classic thing you say when you lose the lottery of, we may not have money, but at least we have each other. And that's when Santa's little helper is announced dead by none other than Grandpa Simpson. The dog's dead, which is terribly sad. I don't know why I'm saying it in such a smiley voice. It's awful. The dog falls over in the kitchen, and they think he's dead, but then Lisa points out, well, his tail is wagging, which Grandpa's like, it doesn't mean anything. Dogs' tails can wag for hours after death. Which I'm pretty sure that's not true, sir.
Well, it's Grandpa, so.
Well, the Simpsons do what any pet owner would do. They rush their dog to the vet to see what's wrong. And the doctor, the veterinarian, is actually in the middle of shock paddling a hamster, which is just kind of hilarious. But then it's really sad when he's pronounced dead, He's like, I lost another one. He's all upset, but then he just kind of flings the hamster into a corner trash can, complete with a basketball hoop over it.
This is the part of the job I hate the worst. Flings it. Which, if that shock panel, wouldn't I just fry the hamster?
Yeah, it would have to be set pretty damn low.
It's not a dog, so I can laugh at it. If it was a cat, you would laugh.
You know, I'm not for any animal, like, dying, frankly, but, like, it's only dogs that specifically upset me, and I even mean that with, like, sadly, I'm completely desensitized to, like, as Bart will say in the next episode, yeah. I've seen way too many R-rated movies to, like, care about people dying on screen, but a dog, oh my god, you can't, I just can't even.
That's a big thing,
as my wife would say.
That's a big thing with Game of Thrones lately, because a lot of the dire wolves the main characters have, which are basically huge dogs that can kill people. When people die on Game of Thrones in, like, every episode, people are like, but when one of the dire wolves dies, everyone's, like, bawling their eyes out.
I'm totally with you, dude. No such thing as a bad dog, people, only bad owners. And while we're on the subject, adopt, don't buy from fucking puppy mills. Those places are awful. Plenty of good dogs available for adoption right now, wherever you live. The more you know. Bling. Unfortunately, the Simpsons find out that Santa's little helper has a twisted stomach, which sounds awful. It would require surgery that costs $750, which... This is a moment that I love. This whole next sequence, I think, is great writing. Brilliant Simpsons, full of heart and humor, but also really, really, really difficult to watch because I've seen that, and I could find myself in that position, and that's awful. I've got a dog that eats everything, and I just fear the day she eats something that I can't afford to surgically remove. I'll be Homer later. I'll have the fucking book in front of me and a pair of scissors and some rubbing alcohol, and, you know, I'll do an atheist prayer and see what happens.
I mean, $750, I can totally see where Marge and Homer are coming from here. Like, I don't have a dog right now, but I've had a couple dogs, one in particular that I love with every ounce of my being, and if this were to happen to her, I would have been crying at my mom being like, it's just money, I don't care, do it. But now it's like, when you have to pay for things on your own, you're like, I might have to say goodbye to the dog as much as it's going to break my heart.
Well, as shitty as my credit history is, up until recently, I wouldn't have even been able to put it on credit, so it wouldn't even be a choice. Honestly, I'm the type of sucker that if something did happen, I'd probably be like, fuck it, finance it, we're good, we'll pay it, just keep the dog alive. But at the same time, you know, you gotta be realistic in those situations, and unfortunately, especially as dogs get older, sometimes it's just not really something you can do. I mean, if you're talking about a 12, 13, 14-year-old dog and near $1,000 surgery for, you know, what you're really not going to have a long time, and you also got to consider the dog's health at that point too. So
well,
there's a lot of emotional weight on this episode.
You bring up old in this sense when you're talking about dogs, and it's unclear to me how old Santa's little helper actually is. We all know because we've been rewatching the episodes. The very first episode is about them finding Santa's little helper when Bart is 10 and they find him at the dog tracks. I have noticed, watching newer episodes on TV or on FXX, that there are flashback scenes to when Bart and Lisa are much younger and Santa's little helper is in the backyard. I find that very odd. I don't know if the Simpsons forgot they had a dog, maybe gave it to the dog races and then ended up getting him back. They had some like Men in Black memory wipe thing, but it really caught me off guard that like Santa's little helper, I've seen him in episodes where the kids are younger, and that does not make sense.
I still love this theory that we came up with on one of these podcasts where possibly every episode of The Simpsons is actually just a Simpsons family from a slightly different universe. So we're not actually watching the same family from week to week. We're watching a slightly different version of that same family. I think that answers a lot of issues with this show.
It just makes you feel better so you can sleep at night. But I want continuity, damn it. That's why Homer's not actually unbreakable. He's just in every other dimension. He's banged up terribly and takes months to recover.
Well, the Simpsons decide they need to talk about it, and Bart's confused. He doesn't really know what there is to talk about, and he's also noticing that they are driving away from the hospital and wondering when they'll be back for that surgery. Homer says that they'll be back after they tell this story about the best place in the world, doggy heaven. And he, talks about how everything would be great for him, and it would be the ultimate happy place for a dog to be, and all the other cool dogs are there. But this is what I was talking about, one of my favorite scenes in all of The Simpsons so far. when Bart counters Homer's story, not with a, like, oh, that's wonderful, but, well, does that mean there's a doggy hell? And that's such a great question. Like, the whole concept of heaven and hell, that even Homer
did a good job. Homer explained it pretty well at first.
He did his best. He stretched a little bit when he was trying to decide which dogs would be there.
One Lassie, the one
Hitler's
that bit
dog,
Timmy.
for instance.
Yeah, Hitler's dog. What was the other one? Richard Nixon's dog. What was his name? Chummy or whatever. And Lisa goes, Checkers.
Bart is slowly starting to catch up. He says, hey, does this have anything to do with Santa's little helper?
Did you see Lisa in the background where she literally was just like, oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love Lisa's reaction there, actually. And it's so funny because you got to keep in mind that she's the younger sister, which, it's great. But we've talked about this many times. Bart is smart in his own way, but he does often not connect things like this, and that's just part of his character.
He's a beastmaster. There's a beast in trouble, and he's one-track minded and upset.
Bart responds after his parents are like, oh, we can tell you're upset. You're darn right I'm upset, and I'm going to do whatever I can to save Santa's little helper. And Marge is like, watch your language. And she's like, oh, wait, you did.
Yeah, that was really funny.
Love that. And then Bart walks away, and it's very much implied that he said, like, son of a bitch. This is where we get those Santa's little helper puppy eyes, though, that absolutely killed me. Honestly, just, like, really hard to watch. I had to do, like, the look away thing to be completely fair, watching through the finger cracks. But no, Santa's little helper is basically, as Homer's talking about how they're just not going to be able to afford it, he's sitting at his lap, looking up at him with that way that only a dog can, and they animated it so well. Like, it absolutely connected with me as a dog owner, that my dogs give me that look, like, anytime they want dinner or a walk, and I've been lazy or tired.
And it works.
Oh, it works so well.
I mean, even with Santa Little Helper's case, it works.
Part of the reason I was late today is despite having a shit ton on my plate, I still had to find time to walk my dogs because they needed the exercise. They needed the exercise. The Simpsons needed money. They went to the only place they could, the only place they had left. They tried to borrow money from Mr. Burns, which, as you may very well know, does not usually end well. I have to ask, and I'm blanking here, have we already had an instance of Release the Hounds, or is this the first?
I'm pretty sure we've had Release the Hounds before.
Even if we have, this is a very, very early use of a very popular Simpsons phrase, Release the Hounds.
I love the quote between Burns and Smithers in this scene. It had me laughing. It's after Homer leaves and Burns is laughing at Smithers, he says, dogs are idiots. Think about it, Smithers. If I came into your house and started sniffing on your crotch and slobbering all over your face, what would you say? And Smithers says,
do you mean you, sir?
And as Burns is saying it, you just can't help but laugh the whole time. Oh my gosh.
That's one of the better lines so far between these two.
Sniffing at your crotch and slobbering all over your face.
After the rejection, Homer's gone to that last resort. This is where he's reading that How to Do Surgery book. That Marge is like, you cannot do this yourself. So he throws the book in the fire, and I noticed there's a few other books in there, including the lottery that we spoke of earlier, and the Cosby book from back on the Boxcar Derby racing episode, Saturdays of Thunder. There was also one other book, but I did not catch what it was. Do you or your book happen to have that?
No, I didn't see that written down.
Oh, bummer. But I honestly expected you to step up there. That's usually your type of thing.
That's fine. You can think what you want about me.
Well, they do decide they are going to get that surgery, Richie, but it is going to come at a very high price for everybody in the family. Bart, not so bad. He's going to have to get his, or at least not, it shouldn't be that bad, but we'll see what happens. But he's going to have to get his haircuts for free down at the haircut school, or whatever it's called, the place where people learn to cut hair. Marge, we learned earlier in the episode that she plays weekly with a group of people at the hair salon. She plays the lottery weekly as is, but she's going to give that up. I'm sure that won't bite her in the ass. Unfortunately for Lisa, she's not going to be able to get Volume 4 of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which she'd been collecting every week at the grocery store. Specifically, this one went from like Copernicus to something. I mean, what are the odds that she would need specifically something that fell in that range in this episode?
Which I want to ask before you get to Homer here. Is this something you think that they would actually be able to finance? Because they never explain that. Because if they can finance it, then yeah, this plan makes logical sense. But if they need that money like right now and it's got to be like cash or check, they'd have to wait like months before they saved up that much money. And I assume Santa's Little Helper would have died by then.
Well, I know Care Credit does 12 months interest free on anything over like $100 or something like that, or it might be more than that. But I don't know if that existed back then, but that's going to be what I'm assuming they did.
Fair enough.
Well, in addition to those sacrifices, Maggie can't get new baby clothes, which is kind of hilarious throughout this episode. But probably worst and most difficult of all, Homer is going to have to give up beer, which we very well know Homer does not want to do. He's come up with a lot of alternative suggestions to not give it up in the past. He has one here. Might not be his most well thought out plan, but he decided that instead of giving up beer, they're just going to become a traveling family of acrobats.
Smart move, Homer. I love how everyone it goes to a shot from behind Homer where it's looking over the kitchen table and all the family leans into the table like, are you fucking serious?
Yeah, it's another just great animation moment. You're right. The family does make these sacrifices. They some way somehow manage to come up with the money to save Santa's Little Helper. And there's a sequence where it's in the surgery. He's moving towards the light. And just before he hits that little doggy door in the sky, he backs up and he gets pulled back into reality. He's woken up to mouth from the vet, which is awesome. Hilarious.
You would hope that your vet would do that for one of your dogs.
Man, you know what? I actually, in the last CPR, I get CPR certified every 2 years. I get it renewed. And at the last one I did, I actually got trained specifically in dog CPR.
Oh, that's an actual thing?
Yeah, you actually hold the mouth shut and you breathe through their nose, though. You don't go mouth to mouth with them.
Never go bass to mouth.
Exactly. But no, in the event, now you have to be very careful, because keep in mind, if you're someone who's doing CPR on somebody, if you overinflate their lungs, you're going to hurt them or kill them anyway. So you have to be very careful that you only, breathe small puffs of air, because most dogs have lungs much smaller than us. So, but yeah, it totally works. Close the mouth, breathe through the nose. I do it for my pet in a heartbeat. I do it for almost any dog in a heartbeat. Anyway, there is another great moment there in the waiting room while they're waiting for Santa's Little Helper to come back before my most happy moment in the episode when they reunite. There's a guy waiting on his gamecock to come out of surgery, and he comes out, but the nurse has some bad news. That gamecock is never going to be able to fight again. And the guy's like, oh, you'll see, he'll fight again one day, which is terrible, because cockfighting is awful. It's almost as bad as dog fighting.
It's funny how they spun it, though. Yeah.
It's still a really good joke. Yeah.
Like the boxer that can never go back in the ring, sort of thing.
Right. They made it seem like it was like a prestigious thing to be a fighter, even as a cockfighter. But yeah. Again, happy moment. Santa's Little Helper, he's all bandaged up, or he's got his stomach untwisted, or whatever it was, and he's back in the family, and everyone couldn't be happier. They all love him, and he loves them, and it's the best.
The end.
And that's the end of the episode, and I'm so happy and thrilled, and was left with joyous, happy thoughts. Except it wasn't, because we get to 2 days later, and that loving, doving feeling has worn off just a little bit, because, for one, it's supposed to be pork chop night, but I didn't mention it earlier. Another sacrifice the Simpsons had to make. They had to do a little bit of changes up in their grocery budget, so pork chop night was replaced with chub night. And they don't know what that is any more than we do.
I don't even know what that is.
It's to the point that Homer is actually jealous of Santa's Little Helper's food because it actually has meat in it. Marge is like, Homer, you wouldn't want that. It's mostly snouts and entrails. Snouts. I imagine, if you're hungry enough, it's probably gonna keep you alive.
I mean, at least he's using every part of the animal.
We get another really, really meme-worthy moment. I've seen it a lot online. One of the more famous quotes that you see from Mr. Homer J. And that is, we got Kent Brockman, big pimpin' on the news. He's got the fur coat. He's got the hat. He's doing his thing. The Simpsons family is totally jelly. And Homer says something along the lines of, like, he may have a lot of money, but there's one thing he can't buy. And they're like, what's that? A dinosaur.
It's true.
So he's not wrong.
Yeah.
So I mentioned briefly earlier that the school was going to get like half that money. Well, turns out there is some fine print in that contract because the state gave them a small donation. It definitely wasn't half of the money. In fact, the donation was one single chalkboard eraser. And Skinner kind of goes into like an irate, like, you know, cursing there under his breath. I knew the country would screw me again, just like Vietnam. Yeah, that's right, yeah. I knew the government would screw me again, just like back in Nam or something like that.
He's like, I was there for 3 years, and then he gets cut off.
Yeah. Kent Brockman has another great line here. He's actually really funny in this episode.
Yeah.
More so, I mean, he's usually a good character, but he has a lot of great lines here.
They give him a little bit more depth in this one, even though it's depth the wrong way.
Right. But he's announcing this week's lottery after he just cleaned out the big jackpot from last week, and he kind of chuckles as he says the $40,000 jackpot. Numbers happen to be 3, 6, 17 again, 18, 22, and 29. Marge is damn near in tears because those are the numbers that she plays every week, except this one because she had to sacrifice the money to save the dog.
Yeah, but that's hindsight, man. Like, it's one of those things where if they wouldn't have helped the dog and she played those numbers, they probably wouldn't have rolled out that week. Like, it's...
Well, that's some Murphy's Law shit right there. Whatever can happen will happen, and like you know how it is. If she would have played those numbers, it totally wouldn't have happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. But Marge isn't the
funny.
only one. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. But Marge isn't the only one to be scorned by this saving of the dog, the sacrifices that they had to make. It just so happens that Maggie must have had a growth spurt because she instantly grows almost completely out of her onesie that she has.
I think it's just old clothes. She ripped it in the kitchen table scene earlier, like she bicepped out of it in the earlier kitchen scene.
See, I thought that was because she was growing more so than they're all, but it could be a combination of both. Who knows? I do love that in the next scene we see her tucked in a Crown Royal sack.
That made me laugh.
That's great. Absolutely. Lo and behold, in Lisa's class, they are going to have a test over Copernicus, which, again, would have been in that set that she had to skip because of the dog.
It would have been at the beginning, so she wouldn't
dog.
have even had to, like, use the index to look him up. She could have just flipped to the first page.
Too bad it's not like the Goosebumps books, where in the back of the book there's always the first few chapters of the next book, because then she would have been totally set. Shout out to the Goosebuds. Great podcast and funny dudes. I like to listen to those guys. I doubt they're listening, but if they happen to be, shout out to them. Rad podcast. They go and they tear up on some Goosebumps. If you're a fan, it's a lot of fun. For Homer, he's hit rock bottom at Moe's bar because he is actually singing a song, Come Out Tonight, whatever. He's singing and dancing for a fucking quarter, Rich, is what he's doing. And the worst part is they throw the goddamn quarter and it like rolls out of the door and he has to like go chase it. And it's super pathetic. Moe is even more upset because before he lost all his money, that used to be his best customer. Which I think he owes him a few...
Before he had to save his dog. Yeah,
he owes him a few beers,
You don't dance
man.
for a quarter, you dance for a beer.
Right. You obviously you have.
No, I haven't. I've danced after the beer plenty of times, but I think this is just a throwback to old movies and TV shows where you'd see the drunk that's down on his luck, people making him dance for a quarter, like in old westerns and things like that. So like it had to be the quarter. But if you think about it in logical sense, he'd be doing a lot of dancing for a lot of quarters before he could afford a beer. And honestly, in Homer's sake, one beer is not going to make him feel any better or sad. It's just going to be one beer.
Right, one beer is not really enough to make a huge impact. It's just enough to make you want a second beer. Last but not least, the haircut thing also obviously is going to backfire. I love the fact, though, that after the guy makes the mistake, he calls over his manager and he's like, Mr. So-and-so, I did it again.
I did it again. Which, to be fair, once that happens, he leaves like 3 of Bart's spikes.
I know, you just go for the buzz cut at that point.
Yes! Like,
totally.
It's such an easy fix.
Man, when I was... So, my dad was, like, a military dude back in the day. Like, when I was a kid, he was out of the military, but he had been in the military. And to be fair, as a kid, it's a super easy haircut, but I didn't actually know that having other hairstyles was an option. I just thought going to get a haircut meant they cut all of it off. Like, it took till I was, like, older than I probably should have been, till I'm, like, sitting in the barber shop and I notice some other kid, like, goes and gets a haircut, and I'm like, hey, wait a second. He left with a lot more hair than I get to. What's going on here, Dad? Because it was buzz cut city for me, like, every single time I got a haircut as a kid. It never got longer than, like, a quarter inch, I swear.
I accidentally got a buzz cut once in middle school. Tried to hide it with a hoodie on my way home, and my mom instantly went, take that hood off.
That's probably why I have the ponytail to this day, is I'm just still rebelling against my youth.
Fight the system.
No, I do that shit because I donate it to, like, kids with cancer. It's, you know, an easy charity, and I don't have a job that prevents me from doing it, so easy thing to do. Very passive charity on my part.
The Dirk Nowitzki thing.
Does he do that too?
Remember every year, back when like the Suns and Mavs were playing each other every year in the playoffs, and even a little before that, he used to grow his hair out and then cut it off like at midseason. He hasn't done that for the last couple of years. He keeps his hair pretty much the same now, but he used to do
remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Totally. That was like 2003, 2004-ish, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah, and a few years after.
Sure.
When you yelled hysterically when the Suns came back and beat the Mavs in the playoff game, and we locked you out of the party, and then you knocked on the window and broke it. And you tried to get back in.
Yeah, that did happen. I had also jumped into the pool in excitement and had my phone in my pocket, which sucked because you know how it is. Your phone is essentially like your lifeline, especially at that time, because I didn't even have a fucking house or an apartment. I was basically like living on our friend's couch at that point, so.
There may or may not have been beer involved.
There was. There's no reason to throw shade on that. There was a lot of alcohol. That was when we invented the mile, which is when we filled up the fucking Gatorade bottle and I shotgunned like 5 beers straight out of it, and that's how that night started.
Sure, blame the alcohol.
Blame it on the alcohol.
And those windows were shitty too. So.
Yeah, they were super shitty. And I took care of it. I got management I had a good relationship with the front office. I got management to replace it.
What were we talking about Murphy's Law earlier, though?
If it can, it will, dude. It's the truth. Absolutely the truth. You gotta be careful with that shit. But the Simpsons have now just basically started to completely ignore Santa's Little Helper. They're super pissed because they basically caused them all so many problems, and like everyone's like, stupid dog, blah blah blah.
But it's nothing that bad, though. That's the thing. This is all
it's all overreaction,
incredibly selfish.
Absolutely. We get to a scene with Marge and Homer in bed after everybody's been dissing the dog, and Marge is like, "Hey Homer, did you close the gate?" And he's like, "Yes." But then you instantly hear the gate start swinging in the wind. Then Homer is like, "Oh, did you mean tonight?" Love that.
And then that's when he goes, "Bart, close the gate." And Bart's in his bed going, "Lisa, close the gate." And Lisa's like, "Oh, Maggie, close the gate." And I think that's when you actually see her in her Crown Royal bag, because it shows in her room.
Yep, that's when she's sleeping there. You're totally right. But no one closes the gate, and sure enough, Marge is right. Santa's Little Helper takes off out the doggy door and goes on quite the adventure. And he's actually kind of a badass, dude. He fights a fucking bear, he forges a river, he saves somebody from a fire, and I love there's a scene where he chases a cat, but they don't actually animate it. They do like the old school cartoon trick where they have the dot moving on the map, and it chases it up a tree on the map, and I actually thought that was like a really funny gag.
Yeah, I agree. That was actually a really funny little moment there. They always do things like that where they try not to do the same joke too often. Things are usually funny in threes, and after they had the 3 things that he was doing, they went back to a different version of it. So you gotta change pace to make it funny and relevant.
Well, his little adventure does come to an unfortunate end because he's picked up by the dog catcher. And that's where this episode takes a very, very hard turn, because it shifts to Mr. Burns' house. We get none other than Ned Flanders doing some door-to-door trying to fundraise for something. I think he was like trying to help the poor or something like that. I thought it was funny, though. Did you notice the shoes that Ned was wearing?
Yes, and I think I think they did this on purpose for this one episode. Ned is wearing his running shoes, Mr. Burns calls them, but they're his assassins.
They are the assassins. That's absolutely correct. That's the Fitbit shoe before there was a Fitbit.
But if you remember the last time we saw these, it was in a Santa's Little Helper episode. It was Bart's dog gets an F.
It really was. He shredded him up. You're totally
No, he shredded
right.
up. He shredded up Homer's, but Ned had his in that episode, and that's the only other time you've seen him. So I thought like they had to do this on purpose because it's 2 episodes revolving around the dog, and those are the only 2 times you've seen it. So I feel like they just like threw that in there for that purpose.
That is super, super interesting. I need to look up and see if that was the same writer or director in both episodes, because that would be pretty interesting if that was the case.
It just stood out to me that that's the only 2 episodes you've seen.
I didn't make that connection at all. I'm really glad you pointed that out. I did notice the assassins, obviously.
They stand
but
out,
I didn't think about the fact that, they show up. And not to be fair, like when Burns says, I hope you wore your running shoes, they even like draw attention to the shoes to some degree. But we once again get a releasing of the hounds. But one of the hounds is moving a bit slower than the rest, and he's obviously a very old dog. And Mr. Burns says, "What's wrong with Crippler?" Smithers has to basically explain that dog's been there since the 60s, sir. He's old. And Monty Burns kind of reminisces as he thinks about, oh yeah, I remember the first time he bagged himself a hippie. He was not having a groovy time. Burns has to replace that dog with another. He needs his full fleet of hounds to attack people and keep Girl Scouts off his property. So he goes to the pound, and sure enough, there he finds Santa's Little Helper. And he decides he'll be the perfect pup to add to his pack.
And then we get the best dog training school ever.
He trains Santa's Little Helper in the most awful way possible. This is one of the scenes I fucking hate watching. The part where he gets Smithers to dress up like a Girl Scout is hilarious, but I fucking hate the part where he just punches the dog in the nose over and over again and gets him to be like an angry dog, because that's what I mentioned earlier. There's no fucking such thing as a bad dog. There are only bad owners, and Mr. Burns is the fucking worst.
To be fair, though, it's Mr. Burns that's doing the punching, and you can even tell in that scene he wasn't doing it very hard. And that's probably why they shot it the way
That's fine. Next time I see you, I'll punch you in the nose, but it won't be very hard, and we'll see how fun that is.
If you punch me the way Mr. Burns punches, I will allow it, because he punched a fly once, and the fly... Well, no, that was Homer with the fly left. But an ant toppled Mr. Burns once. So I'm saying, like, he does not punch with any kind of force.
I'll give you that he's feeble. I will give you that, but it's not cool to watch somebody punching a dog in the face over and over again.
Why do you think they shot it from the angle they did? And that
to make people like me get super upset.
No. I think they shot it the way it did because they couldn't actually show Mr. Burns hitting Santa's Little Helper. It's shot from Santa's Little Helper's view, so you're not actually seeing. It's not like a side view where you're actually seeing him clock the dog. You just see him like bonking him on the nose a little bit. I think that's why they did it that way.
Yeah, but it's still an unfortunate look. But
that makes me think that they did actually cartoon it the other way around. And when they were all watching it, they were probably like, we need to change this a little bit.
Dude, I fully admit, I 100% agree with anyone who thinks that I am being a total pussy about this dog situation. But I just can't help it, dude. Like, it honestly is, like, emotionally affecting me in a way that I didn't realize. Like, again, it's interesting. This is one of my favorite parts about this podcast, is these changes in me as a human, as a young kid / teenager versus now, and just like the way these episodes affect me in different ways. And this is a big time one, because I remember liking this episode as a kid. And again, don't get me wrong, it's not that I didn't like this episode. I think it's a very good episode, but I found it much more difficult to watch this time.
You have to like the episode because of the way it ends. Like, I know that's your favorite part.
Absolutely, we're getting there very quickly. While Burns is training Santa's Little Helper, the Simpsons are looking for him. They're upset again. This is part of the episode that I think is so brilliant, because honestly, especially when I was a kid, not my current dogs, obviously, but when I was a kid, I also had dogs, and there are definitely times that I remember neglecting them, and I even remember after they died how sad I was, and how I wished I would have spent more time and taken them on more walks. And as I became an older person, I did that more often. I do take better care of my dogs than I did as a kid. But I say all that to say is, as soon as you have some sort of incident where your dog goes missing or even escapes or anything like that, you instantly lose all of the like, oh, my dog shit on my carpet this morning and threw up in my bed. You don't even remember that. You just remember all the like licks on the face and the lap sitting and all that bullshit.
Yeah, I've cried like a baby a couple times when I thought some of my dogs ran away. I lived in a up and coming neighborhood once where it was that you had to have a little bit of money at the time, even though we didn't have any. I don't know how we got that house, but I had a beagle that had moved with us from a previous house, and he used to dig out of the yard all the time. And one night, it was probably about 10 o'clock or so, we went out and looked at the backyard for him. He was gone. We saw a new hole, and I ran out the front door, and I saw him running all the way down the end of the street. We lived at the end of another street. And so me and my mom went chasing after him and looked all over for him, all over the neighborhood, and couldn't find him. And I was just crying. I almost believed in God for a minute because I was saying, oh, God, please just give me my dog back. And my mom's like trying to call me
Atheist prayer, I dig it.
My mom's just trying to calm me down. We're walking back to our house, and I hear a collar. I can't see. It's so dark outside. I can't see anything. And I hear a collar like way back towards our house, and we're about halfway down the street. And I just start sprinting and bawling my eyes out and sprinting and yelling his name. And I hear the collar noise getting like louder and louder and jingling more. And sure enough, it was my damn dog. It somehow run all the way around this huge circle that would take forever for me to do. And he literally like jumped into my arms basically. And I was like so crying and so upset but happy at the same time. I thought he ran away from me, but he just wanted to go for a walk, I guess.
Wow.
And it was a beagle. That's how beagles are. We ended up giving him away.
Oh, I've got two of them now, dude. I totally understand that shit. They one of mine, Nowie, I've talked about her many times on the podcast, but she actually has a bad habit of when we visit other people and we travel with the dog, like a couple of friends we have that we visit, I guess she gets nervous or something, but she'll actually always escape and then go roaming these random neighborhoods. And fortunately, every single time some random neighbor has called and been like, hey, your dog's here. She's really sweet. She just basically jumped in our laps as soon as we came up to pet her because my dog's a slut. She always is found, but we've been lucky on those occasions, and it's very nerve-wracking. As soon as your dog is missing, you instantly think the worst.
Well, to be fair, man, I learned at that age after the dog kept digging out of the yard, I was told by vets and numerous other people that beagles are more comfortable on farm settings, that they like the wide open spaces and they like to explore a little bit. But I was told in most cases they had heard they always go back. They know we're homeless, so they always go back eventually. With Nowie, I could see a little bit of loosey-goosiness added in there where she might not come back quite as quickly. But I was always told beagles like being in open spaces, so we gave my beagle up, and it was one of the saddest moments of my life because just being in the little tiny neighborhood, I didn't think he was going to be happy, so we gave him up, and I cried all day. And that's only my second favorite dog.
The Simpsons are now in panic mode, and they are looking all over, but they're not doing the greatest job. Especially Homer. He actually, we see a scene where he's putting up all of his lost dog posters on the same building, and he gets to his last one, and as he walks away from the building, they demolish it.
That's like you hanging up signs for the apartment complex.
I did used to do that. Yeah,
we talked about that before.
That was a cool gig.
Yeah, I imagine you hanging everything on one door and being done.
No, I did cut a lot of corners on that job, but I did actually pass out flyers most of the time. While the Simpsons are going over, I love too, Lisa goes to Barney. She's going door to door, and she knocks on Barney's door, and of course his place is an absolute sty. He's like, I totally understand where you're coming from. I haven't found my dog in days. And you hear muffled barking coming under a pile of trash. It's awful but hilarious. No, honestly, that just made me laugh. I mean, I totally get how awful that is, but for whatever reason, that particular instance did not bother me. I do not know why that is.
I can venture a guess. It's because if they would have shown a part of the trash moving around a little bit, you'd be like, oh my god, the dog's trapped under there. But you just heard a noise. So they didn't get too specific on it. It was more general, so it made it funny. Yeah,
you probably nailed it there. While this is going on, they actually do some Clockwork Orange shit where they pin Santa's little... God damn, it's hard to say his name plurally. Where they pin Santa's little helper's eyes open and make him watch training videos, basically. And it's a funny scene again, but again, for whatever reason, that scene did bother me. So, but it's hilarious
it's from
to
Clockwork
watch.
Orange.
Yeah, that's true. That's just a fucked up movie in general. Marge decides it's time to start thinking about consoling the family, and she reminds them all about doggy heaven. But Homer breaks down and is like, oh, Marge, there's no such place, and he's, saying this right in front of the children. Marge kind of nudges him, and he's like, oh, no, or, I mean the opposite of that.
But at least he's upset. It's good to see Homer actually caring about somebody other than himself.
To some extent, because the very next thing we see is Bart is like, I'm not ever giving up on finding my dog. I'm going to go out there and search until I find them. And Homer's response is like, that's great. I'll be here on the couch watching TV.
And to again prove that Bart is the Beastmaster, he only has to go to 2 houses.
He's synced in. He had some sort of radar, sonar, or something that he was able to track his dog with. And that second house was none other than Monty Burns' home again, and we happen to know that's where this dog is living now. So he knocks on the door. He's in some sort of like rejuvenation chamber trying to keep his youth. He doesn't even get out of it to say, release the hounds, when Smithers lets him know that there's a sweet boy at the door. I love this scene coming up, and as you know, and actually this is another thing coming up that I realized as an adult I never really connected, but now watching it,
this scene always got to me when I was a kid.
No, hear me out. What I was going to say is the scene we're about to see is Santa's little helper is in attack mode, and Bart realizes it's happening. As Santa's little helper is jumping in air to attack Bart, he says, I love you, boy, and you can see the recognition in his eyes, and it actually goes to flashback sequences of all the happy times with Santa's little helper and Bart. Licking face, throwing fetch, even the throwing the frisbees at the eye that we saw.
Oh, that still I forgot that
hilarious.
Was in there. That got me.
Oh, it gets me every time. Doink.
Frisbee right off the eyes. So you don't have a problem with the frisbee in the eye? You have a problem with Maggie?
I don't know. I'm a weird... Human beings are weird. My brain is wired the way it is, Richie. I don't know why certain things bother me and certain things don't, but that thing makes me laugh every time.
Because of the plastic noise.
It's probably the noise. The noise helps. But mid jump, basically, he goes from attack to love, and I love that. But this is what I was referring to that I connected more with this time that I really like. They have a scene next where the rest of the pack is still after Bart, but Santa's little helper actually is able to fend all of them off, and that ties into the montage we spoke of earlier, and I love the way the flow of this episode goes, because we see Santa's little helper fight off a fucking bear, and that makes so much sense that he's such a badass that he can fight off the rest of this pack of dogs. He does, he saves Bart, they go home, and of course, everything is happily ever after at this point.
See, the reason that part, again, I will stick by the fact that part has always gotten to me ever since I was a kid. And it's not because of the tie-in with the bear. It's because, like, they reconnect and Santa's little helper realizes who Bart is and he's instantly loving to him. And the instant something tries to threaten what he loves, he turns around. He's just like, nah, you ain't getting in here. And, like, that's the way I've always seen that part. And, like,
sure,
the part
that's super sweet.
Always makes me tear. That's the part that always makes me tear up because it's like he loves Bart so much that nothing's going to get close to him at all. And
boy's best friend in this case, and it's definitely not wrong.
No, dog of death. You step into my ring, you know what's going to happen.
There you go, and that makes that title a lot less sad too. So I'm all for that. I love the very end sequence. We're at the Simpsons home. They're all fighting over who gets to pet the dog more. Homer wants another turn, even though he just pet him for like 10 minutes or something straight. They tell Homer he can have the consolation pet, go pet the cat, and he says, what's the point? Which...
The cat? What's the point?
Hilarious.
Which made me laugh a lot.
Finally, we end with a statement on screen that says, no dogs were hurt in the making of this episode. There was one cat that got sick, and somebody shot a duck. But that's all.
Which had to make PETA so pissed.
But that's PETA, so fuck them.
Yeah.
Who cares? That's awesome. And that's coming from an animal lover. PETA's the worst.
When you have to have somebody on set for Wolf of Wall Street to make sure Jonah Hill doesn't actually swallow a worm, and the worm had fucking handlers on the Wolf of Wall Street. How ridiculous is that? It's a fucking worm.
That is fucking ridiculous. But that does bring us to the end of the episode. Richie, is there anything else that you or that book of yours want to say about Dog of Death?
I have nothing else but my little guidebook here. The Simpsons, a complete guide to our favorite family. It did have a couple notes on this one. It said when Homer is hanging up flyers, you can see that the photos of the missing dog are plastered over flyers of a missing Skinner from the episode Bart the Murderer. I thought that was cool.
Oh, awesome.
The secondary newspaper headline, on the newspaper article it showed earlier, it said President and Rockstar to swap wives, which I thought was pretty funny. And let's see. The outside the veterinary's clinic, the statues out there were of lions, and the lions were both in like little arm bandages. on each side of the entrance. So I thought that was cool as well.
Rad.
A lot of stuff in the background.
A lot of little things there. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think I've said enough about this episode. Again, great episode. A little bit hard to watch as a dog lover, but ultimately, like most shows or movies with dogs, all is well that ends well, and this has a really sweet ending. So that's all for Dog of Death, but we've still got Colonel Homer to talk about. But first, let's hear from our Podden family.
Hey, this is Knock from the Geek Yogurt Podcast. Tune in every week as we discuss movies, TV, comics, and video games. We are on Podbean, iTunes, Satchel, or on your favorite podcast app. You can find us on Facebook or Twitter at Yogurt Podcast and weigh in on our weekly topics.
Alright everyone, this conversation got just a little bit long, so we decided this one would be more enjoyable for you if we split it into two parts. So this week you are getting Dog of Death, and next week you'll hear the second part of this conversation where we discuss Colonel Homer. Thank you again for tuning in to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Remember to follow us on Twitter. You can follow the WizKid at thewiz_kid23. I am at MrMostDaysOff, and of course the show is Best Darn Diddly. You can follow all of that on both Twitter and Instagram. We look forward to being back again with you next week for Colonel Homer.